Hello everyone. Today we are going to analyze the fourth stanza of the poem Thoughts in a Garden by Andrew Marvell. We have seen that in the first three stanzas, Marvell says that a person should return to nature in order to relax himself for refreshment and also for repose and rest. In the fourth stanza, he writes that when we have run our passion's heat, that is, when we have spent out our passions of our youthful days. That is, he says that when our love has exhausted or when our passions have run their course, we can do what we can do is that we can withdraw into a garden for rest and for refreshment. He gives examples of two mythologies. He says that when we have run our passion's heat, love hither makes his best retreat. That love retreats here in the garden, and that is the best thing it can do. The gods that mortal beauty chase, still in a tree, did end their race. He says that even gods in mythologies who chased beautiful women, their race also ended in a tree or ended in a garden. He gives examples of these gods. First, he speaks about God Apollo. He says that God Apollo, or the sun god, he haunted a nymph named Daphne, but his race also ended in a laurel tree because Daphne prayed to God that she should be turned into a laurel tree in order to be saved from Lord Apollo. So she was changed into a laurel. Similarly, he gives another example from mythology. He talks about God Pan. He says that God Pan also chased another uh, another nymph named Syrinx, but Syrinx also prayed to God that she should be turned into a reed in order to be saved from God Pan. So she was converted into a reed, and God Pan did not receive her as a beautiful woman, but he received her as a reed. So we see that when God Apollo pursued the nymph Daphne, Daphne prayed to be a bay tree, converted into a bay tree or a laurel, and she was turned into one. Similarly, another nymph named Syrinx was also saved from Lord Pan by being turned into a reed when God Pan pursued her. So we see that even those gods who ran after the earthly beautiful women, their race also ended in trees, and those trees were in the garden. In the second stanza, Marvel continues to say, what wondrous life in this I lead. He says that I lead a very wonderful life in the garden. And here he continues, ripe apples drop about my head. That as he is walking in the garden, ripe apples are dropping near his head. The garden is so full of apple trees, the luscious clusters of the vine. There are clusters of wine or grapefruits everywhere. Upon my mouth do crush their wine. He says that as I walk, these grapes touch my mouth and I can taste them. The nectarine, which is a kind of fruit, and curious, delicious peach fruits into my hands themselves do reach. They are touching my hands themselves. I do not have to go to touch them. The garden is so full of nectarine and peach. Stumbling my hands into my hands themselves do reach, stumbling on melons as I pass. He says that as I am passing through the garden, I am stumbling on melons because there are so many melons in the garden. Ensnared with flowers, I fall on grass. He says that as I walk in the garden, I am ensnared or entangled or seized with the flowers. My path is obstructed by the flowers, and therefore I fall on the grass. Falling down in the garden because of the flowers is an exaggeration, and Andrew Marvell exaggerates this very wittily in order to show the climax of his happiness or delight. In the seventh stanza, Marvell writes, meanwhile, the mind, from pleasureless, withdraws into its happiness. Meanwhile, in between, his mind, from pleasureless, from lesser pleasures, or from physical pleasures, or from sexual pleasures, withdraws into its happiness, returns back to its own happiness, imagines its own happiness while enjoying the delights of the garden. The mind of the poet turns from lesser pleasures to enjoy its own thoughts. Further, he writes, the mind that ocean were each kind. He says that the mind of a person is like an ocean because an ocean has within itself everything that is present on land. It has every type of creature which can be imagined on land. So the poet says that the mind is able to call up images of all things. In this, it is like a sea, it resembles a sea which is believed to have within itself every kind of creature that exists on this earth. Yet it creates, transcending these. So he says that though the mind creates everything that resembles, that is present on this earth, still it creates more than that is present in on this earth or land, transcending these, that the mind can imagine things which are present in this world. It goes beyond those things. Far other worlds and other seas. The mind can imagine many worlds and many seas, a new heaven and a new earth, annihilating all that is made, annihilating, forgetting all that is made, forgetting all that has been made that has been created in this world, to a green thought in a green shade. The mind creates a number of thoughts which become green because of the green shade of the garden. So the poet means to say that the mind not only comprehends all that there is in this world, but it can imagine, and thus it can create a number of new things for itself. It can create a new universe for itself. The mind is unaware of everything except his reverie, as the poet lies in the cool shade of the garden. For the poet, the whole world is reduced to the delightful strain of thought. The mind thinks and imagines. The poet enjoys in this mood of relaxation in the garden. He gets a number of green thoughts. That is a number of refreshing, light, cool thoughts which have taken their color as if from the cool shade of the plants.
So we see that in the second part of the poem, the poet develops his arguments and opinions about nature. In the fifth stanza, he gives a very sensuous description about the physical pleasures which a person can find in nature. In the sixth stanza, he argues that his pleasure is moreover mental. In the second part of the poem, the speaker develops its arguments and opinions about nature. In the fourth stanza, he says how the race of even gods after beautiful human beings, human ladies ended in nature. In the fifth stanza, he gives a very sensuous physical description about the physical pleasures of trees which a person finds in trees. In the sixth stanza, he argues that this pleasure is moreover mental. Here he uses very odd metaphysical ideas and says that the mind of a person contains another world and garden as well inside it. So we see that Andrew Marvell has in the fourth, fifth and sixth stanza given his own arguments and opinions about nature which move from physical to mental pleasures.